Hello everyone, this is part 17 of What If Naruto Was a Prodigy and in the Anbu, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
It took 2 days to sort through the chaos that the riot of Winter's Court caused. Lord Shinji had arrived back at his home in one piece, although Toa and Komaki reported that they had to disable several disgruntled rioters who had tried to stop them. The wealthy noble had spent the next 24 hours reviewing the affairs of the regional council when he had been away, intent on finding some explanation as to the discord in his holding. Undoubtedly, Shinji was concerned with his reputation and how it would look to have citizens from his region rioting against their protectors, and he knew that both Konoha and the Fire Lord would undoubtedly be sending investigators. Naruto knew that the man wasn't probably going to find anything of relevance. Only he and his team knew that the event had been the result of an enemy operation, one that had obviously been designed to damage the relationship between the Fire Lord's court and Konoha. It pained him to even think it, but unfortunately, the mission had been a complete success. Whoever the enemy agents had been, they had done a very good job creating and inflaming the situation. Dozens of the members of the Chunin military police had been unavailable on the day of the riot, and it was only after Kage had done a little digging that it became apparent that something suspicious had been going on. Over the past week, there had been increased sightings and unconfirmed reports of bandit activity. 4 members of a merchant guard had been killed, and 2 had been kidnapped. A large task force had left a day before the riot, and had only just returned the other day with empty hands and the corpses of those who had been kidnapped. At the same time, some of the more experienced and long-serving Chunin had curiously been granted forced personal leave for the last week. The decision had apparently been made by the clerks in Lord Shinji's court, yet none of them could recall actually signing the paperwork. Naruto suspected that there was either a traitor within the court, or that one of the enemy operatives had managed to infiltrate the spire. It honestly wasn't like it would have been a hard thing to do. There were a dozen smaller events and occurrences like that when viewed separately looked completely innocuous. It was only when they were all brought together that the true picture began to emerge. The enemy agents had arranged, through fake highway robberies and careful infiltration, for over 24 shinobi to be absent on the day of the riot. They had left a single underqualified Chunin in charge of police operations, along with a handful of non-combat genin. Then they had somehow inflamed a mob of hundreds, and through means still yet unknown, sent them in a direct line towards the spire. With the careful assassination of a significant respected community leader, they had sent the mob into a frenzy of outrage. At the same time, they had incapacitated the only Chunin with a well-crafted genjutsu and allowed her to be taken down by what appeared to be a civilian. Despite the fact that it was targeted against Konoha, in some way Naruto admired the way that the operation had been conducted. 100 different variables had been taken into account and everything had gone perfectly. He had a sneaking suspicion that even Team Sigma's presence in the city had been accounted for. After all, it wouldn't take long before word spread of masked Anbu felling citizens of the Land of Fire, and the damage that information could do to Konoha was not to be underestimated. Truly, the enemy agents had done a fantastic job, and their involvement in the entire affair had only come to light by mere chance. The entire situation would have to be handled carefully. The Land of Fire ran on that delicate balance of power between its feudal lord and its hidden village, and when that delicate balance of power was disturbed, well, the Land of Water had shown just how disastrous that scenario could turn out to be. Nonetheless, it was a situation that Naruto wasn't going to have to handle, and he had been all too relieved to send off the mission report back to the Hokage with a monkey summon. The response was brief, terse and to the point. Assist the local garrison in retaining control of the city. Report back for debrief when the situation is deemed to be under control. It was after the second day that Naruto felt that the presence of the police force in Winter's Keep was adequate enough to quell any more disturbances. The mood in the air was grim, but reinforcements from nearby regions had begun to arrive and control had been established. A full Jonin squad from Konoha's Department of Intelligence had arrived to gather whatever information they could. With 3 squads of Chunin backing up the police force, and a series of raids that crushed down on local terrorist groups, the presence of Team Sigma was no longer needed. Hence, Naruto gathered his team and departed from Winter's Keep. As they silently sped through the trees, running towards the top of the valley, they passed a group of shinobi carefully wading through the grass below. The Jonin escorting them watched them carefully, but the Anbu sped past them without pausing, leaving the members of Konoha's cryptanalysis team behind. It was their job to identify the traps that had been laid by the retreat of the enemy agents. Konoha's records were vast, and there was always a chance that a style or trap-making technique could be identified. Do you think they'll find anything? Sasuke asked Naruto in a low mutter. Naruto shook his head. No, he answered a touch bitterly. The enemy was too good to leave something that obvious behind. What's the point at looking at them then? The Uchiha asked after a few moments. By now, the team had almost come to the top of the valley, and they had left the perpetual winter behind. The sun beamed down on them and the frost and snow that clung to their cloaks disappeared into vapors of mist. From behind his mask, Naruto gave a tight smile. Because it's a set of trap techniques that we'll be able to put in the archives, he replied. When there's another attack, we'll have an easier time identifying whether it's this Black Ops team or another Black Ops team. Hey, Sasuke didn't sound particularly amused. Then there'll be another attack then. Oh yeah, Naruto answered grimly. Why wouldn't there be? After all, for the enemy, their mission was a complete success. There's no reason for them to stop now. Without the courage of a noble to slow them down, Team Sigma arrived at Konoha in good time. By the time they had arrived back at their home village, the sun was beginning to set. The moment that the Anbu team arrived at the main gate, a messenger had appeared in a perfect body flicker right next to them, a scroll in his hands. Naruto took it, not surprised to see a black ribbon tying it together. All it took was a wisp of his chakra to unravel the security behind the parchment, and he read the missive carefully. We've been summoned, Naruto told his team. He rolled his eyes. What a surprise. The old man better not chuck anything at me. In hindsight, Naruto thought that perhaps he would have preferred the Hokage to hurl a book at his head. It would have been better than the oppressively grim atmosphere that his team had arrived into. The room was dark and even as the sun continued to set, the lights remained off. The third Hokage leaned back in his chair, the red glow from the end of his pipe casting an ominous glow that highlighted the old man's goatee. Team Sigma knelt before their Hokage unflinchingly as the Hokage stared off into the distance, his face creased into an expression that signified deep thought. Then, after a few minutes, the Hokage stirred in his chair. His robes rustled as he shifted, and he blinked, as if taking notice of the Anbu team there for the first time. Ah, Team Sigma, he noted. A somewhat wry smile crossed his face. Rise. We have much to discuss. Naruto and Team Sigma rose up off the ground and stood at attention. Naruto was at the lead of the squad, and he could practically feel the old man's gaze boring into him. He would have been thankful for the mask that covered his face were it not for the fact that the Hokage was seemingly staring right past it and directly into his eyes. In the end, he averted them and he could have sworn that he saw a glimmer of satisfaction in the Hokage's eyes. There was a flicker of movement. Then, two figures simultaneously appeared behind Sarutobi. Nara Shikaku was one of them, and his scarred face was impassive, his arms folded in thought. The other was the tall form of the Anbu commander, the shinobi responsible for all Anbu operations. His silver mask displayed his rank and prestige, and it gleamed as the last, dying rays of the sun bounced off of it from the window. It was pretty much settled, then. This was not going to be a nice debrief. Uzumaki Naruto, the third Hokage began in a serious tone. You have led a team of operatives under the banner of Konoha into conflict against citizens under the protection of the Fire Lord. Under your command, your team has struck down and killed those our village has been tasked to protect. The Anbu commander shifted. These charges are serious, the person behind the silver mask commented, the synthesized and genderless tone revealing absolutely no emotion. The Fire Lord has demanded answers. You will provide them. Naruto's mouth was dry, and he was really glad for the mask that covered his face. Nonetheless, he was pretty sure that all of the high-ranking shinobi in front of him could see him swallow nervously as he gathered his thoughts, trying to phrase what he was about to say next as carefully as possible. I believe that I completed my mission and followed my orders, Naruto said after a few moments. Our mission was to escort Lord Shinji to the safety of his holding. Every action I took and order I gave was for the completion of the mission. Sarutobi stared down at him, his eyes hard, and Naruto averted his gaze. It was hard to tell what the Hokage was feeling, but Naruto could feel a sinking sensation in the bottom of his stomach. He forced his fears down, ignoring the faint sound of rattling chains, and remained still. The third Hokage made a motion with his hand. Team Sigma, you are dismissed. Go. His eyes never left Naruto, and the unspoken command to stay was obvious. Behind him, Naruto heard his teammates disappear in puffs of smoke, disappearing from the Hokage's office and leaving him alone with Sarutobi. The Anbu commander bent down and murmured inaudibly into Sarutobi's ear. The old man considered whatever it was that he had been told, and then nodded. When the Anbu commander left, there was no smoke and sound, just a flicker of shadows and the execution of a near-perfect body flicker. The third Hokage stared. Uzumaki Naruto stared back. The tension in the air was palpable. Naruto's hands were clenched, his fingers digging in tight against the leather of his wrist guards. Sarutobi puffed on his pipe, letting out a small cloud of hazy smoke, and then put the slender object down on his table. The clack sounded more like a resounding boom, and Naruto gulped as the third Hokage opened his mouth to speak. What's up, squirt? Suddenly, Naruto was under attack. He instinctively moved to bat away the offender suddenly in his personal space, but he was brushed aside with ease, and a large hand came down on his blonde locks and began rubbing them furiously. Naruto lashed out with a kick, hearing a yelp while squirming out of the man's grip, and leapt away, moving closer to the Hokage's side. Jiraiya rubbed his stomach, a mock look of disappointment on his face. When he noticed that Naruto was looking at him, the look disappeared and he smiled brightly. Hey, old man, he said. That right hand of yours kicks pretty hard, you know. A second later, a massive book slammed into the esteemed Sannin's face. Jiraiya made a choking noise from the back of his throat, but to his credit remained standing. Unfortunately, Naruto couldn't say the same as the book that slammed into his mask almost immediately after Jiraiya's was enough to send him flying. Goddamit. Naruto growled under his breath. What have I said about the face, old man? Jiraiya exclaimed, throwing the book away and pointing at Sarutobi accusingly. This is my pride and joy. It's my most important weapon in the war against the sensibilities of a woman's heart. Naruto turned to stare at the Sannin incredulously. Was he serious? Jiraiya noticed his look and gave him a reassuring grin. Don't worry, my young apprentice, he chuckled. Even with your face, I'm sure I can teach you a few tricks to let you bag some women of your own. Naruto's hand rose self-consciously, patting away at his mask. There was nothing wrong with his face. Jiraiya, Sarutobi's voice broke through the air, stern and unflinching. Now is not the time. Naruto straightened at hearing the rebuke in the Hokage's voice, even if it wasn't being directed at him. Jiraiya seemed uncaring of it, however, and he leant on the corner of the Hokage's desk, his arms folded. It's always the time, old man, the large Sannin said. He smiled wryly. You need to lighten up. We can sit here and go on about how the shit has hit the fan, but it's not going to change anything. What'll come will come. We just need to be as prepared as we can. Sarutobi fixed his former student with a firm look. I'm not as old as to be needing advice from my foolish student, he shot back. Nonetheless, the heat and sternness had faded from his voice, and he sighed. What a mess this will become. Jiraiya, seeing Naruto awkwardly standing off to the side, waved the boy over. Take off the mask. We're all friends here, the Sannin said cheerfully. Naruto did as he was told, while Sarutobi picked up a piece of paper. It was wrinkled, as if it had been read many times before, and Naruto could recognize his own handwriting. It was the mission report he had sent back immediately after the incident at Winter's Keep. We're in trouble, Naruto, the Hokage said gravely. Jiraiya harumphed at the serious tone, but didn't disagree with the Hokage's words. The entire situation has become tenuous, and it doesn't appear it will end anytime soon. How bad is it? Naruto asked steadily. Bad, the Hokage replied solemnly. The events that transpired in Winter's Keep occurred in many other parts of the Land of Fire, some less successfully and others more so. However, only in Winter's Keep did the personal representatives of the third Hokage strike down and kill fire citizens. Sarutobi paused and breathed heavily. The outcry has only just begun, and it will become much louder as time goes on. It was a good op, Jiraiya mused out loud. He was stroking his chin. Masterfully done, actually. I hope the Black Ops unit that set this all up gets a bonus. They've earned it. He spoke in an admiring tone, and Naruto frowned. Jiraiya caught his look and chuckled. Lighten up, squirt, he said cheerfully. Take your feelings away from the situation and looked at it again. It's okay to recognize the strength and cunning of an enemy. Actually, I prefer my enemies that way. I'd hate to be beaten down by a moron. He scratched at his chin. I see, Naruto said after a moment's beat. He steeled himself for the next question, knowing that there was a distinct possibility that he wouldn't like the answer. What do you need of me, Hokage-sama? Am I to be the next Hyuga Hisashi? The third Hokage froze, and his piercing gaze slammed into Naruto instantly. Jiraiya lowered the hand he was scratching his head with, looking somber. Naruto managed an uneasy smile, even though his palms were itchy and his mouth was dry. Really, it was okay. If that was what it would take, then Naruto would willingly throw himself on the pyre of sacrifice. It had been his actions that had led to the circumstances the village now found itself in. It was a moment of epiphany as Naruto suddenly realized this was what Hyuga Hisashi had probably felt. Surprisingly, the Hokage was the first to look away, breaking eye contact to stare out the window at the Hokage's monument. The Sannin eyed Naruto shrewdly, and then reached out and none too gently whacked him across the back of the head. Idiot, Jiraiya snorted. He folded his arms, looking unimpressed, while Naruto scowled, rubbing the back of his head. This would have happened whether you were there or not. In fact, it was probably a good thing that you were there. If you hadn't been, all we would have had was speculation. Now we know for sure. There's an outside entity responsible for all of this. Regardless, Sarutobi said grimly. Even if you had butchered the entire city, we could not afford to discard you like that. We will need your strength in the days to come, Naruto. There was a pause. And, of course, he also meant to say that your contributions have been invaluable and it would be a pretty shitty way to reward you for all of your sacrifice by letting you take the fall for something that's not your fault, Jiraiya added, shooting the third Hokage quite the pointed look. Because, you know, just because we're a hidden village doesn't mean we have to forget the small, important things like doing the right thing. Sarutobi frowned. Jiraiya. Yeah, Jiraiya waved off the Hokage before the old man could finish. Naruto almost gaped at the blatant disrespect, but the relationship between mentor and student must have been strong because Sarutobi closed his mouth and shook his head in exasperation. Anyway, Naruto, you've had a long trip. Why don't you go and get changed? There's a briefing for Jonin leaders and key personnel in an hour, so you're going to want to look your best. He grinned and threw his thumbs up. Naruto paused, and looked at the Hokage for confirmation. Jiraiya's smile seemed to dim a little, and he laughed awkwardly, scratching the back of his head. The third Hokage sighed and nodded. Dismissed, Naruto. Yes, Hokage-sama, Naruto intoned, bowed and then disappeared in a swirl of leaves. The two S-class shinobi were left in the office alone. The third Hokage had his elbows on the table, and he rested his chin upon his clasped hands. Jiraiya folded his arms, standing over the older man and casting a shadow over him. Outside, the birds chirped cheerfully and a gentle breeze blew into the room, yet it did nothing to mask the obvious tension between the two shinobi. That kid, Jiraiya said softly, is pretty fucked up, you know. He is the epitome of a reliable shinobi, Sarutobi rebuked quietly. His dedication to the village should be admired. Funny, Jiraiya leaned back, smiling grimly. Orochimaru was also the epitome of a reliable shinobi. So was Hanzo, and Uchiha Itachi. Hell, the fourth Mizukage was meant to be one of those prodigies as well. Funny, isn't it, at how those picture-perfect shinobi tend to be pretty fucked up. Sarutobi smiled thinly. That's the price we pay for strength, he murmured. He cast a baleful eye on his former student. You weren't complaining 25 years ago when you were newly appointed to S rank and the entire village was at your beck and call. I grew up, Jiraiya countered. He gestured out the window. I traveled. I stood back, released my emotions, and saw our world for what it truly was. For all their strength, shinobi like that tend to be miserable human beings. Do not lecture me, Sarutobi said evenly. He leaned back in his chair, reaching into his white and red robes to produce his pipe. I have taught Naruto as I was taught, and how I taught you, just as you took my teachings as you taught Minato. He, too, was one of those shinobi. Yeah, he was, Jiraiya said. He began to move for the door, but he stopped with his hand on the doorknob. But, unlike you, I taught him something very important, even more important than all of his skills. I taught him how to care. He turned around, bitterness on his face. And I'll be teaching that to Naruto as well. Don't try to stop me. He left then, leaving the third Hokage to himself. Sarutobi puffed on his pipe, gazing out the window to look at the face of his predecessor, and the faces of those who came before him. He exhaled, blowing out a cloud of smoke that rose up and formed a hazy image of the leaf insignia. I rather think you're too late, Jiraiya, he murmured. He almost sounded sad. The commander's briefing room was a large, semicircular amphitheater in the heart of the Hokage's tower. A series of benches rose up from the center of the room, allowing dozens, if not hundreds, of shinobi to sit. Large red curtains draped the walls, tiny scrolls of fuinjutsu preventing many of the common eavesdropping techniques, while members of the Jonin Guard stood at attention on the outside. The room was currently full as Jonin leaders, intelligence officers and clan leaders gathered to listen to the latest intelligence briefing regarding the recent civil unrest. The room was filled with low murmurs as the occupants mingled with each other. There were Jonin captains, those in charge of squads ranging anywhere from Genin to other Jonin, talking with members from Konoha's Department of Intelligence. At the front of the room, reserved for the clan leaders, Hyuga Hyashi talked quietly with Aburame Shibi. The two stoic men were strangely animated, their heads bent down as they discussed something that seemed to have the Hyuga frowning. The chatter died away as the third Hokage strolled out from behind the stage. His white and red robe swished as he slowly walked towards to the podium, flanked by Nara Shikaku on his left and Uzumaki Naruto on his right. The Nara seemed to have his eyes closed as he walked out, almost as if he was sleeping with hands in his pockets and his shoulders set in a slouch. On the contrast, the unmasked Anbu agent's eyes never stopped moving, constantly on the guard for a threat, even in the heart of the village surrounded by 100 loyal shinobi. The Hokage cleared his throat and looked out into the crowd. Good afternoon, he greeted hoarsely. He coughed once, then turned away and coughed into his hand again. Taking an audible breath, he turned around and faced his subordinates again. We're here with regards to the sudden and recent civil unrest that has sprung up around the Land of Fire. This briefing is to help explain the background of the issue for squad leaders and persons of interest, and what procedures you are expected to follow if an incident occurs. There was a flicker of light and a gentle hum filled the room. At the back of the amphitheater, 3 shinobi struggled with a giant contraption. Light poured out of it, and it projected an image onto the wall behind the third Hokage. A fuzzy picture of the Land of Fire appeared, several red crosses marked throughout the country. In a span of 24 hours, there were over 30 separate incidents, Sarutobi continued grimly. He gestured at the picture. Most of them occurred in smaller, less patrolled villages and towns. 5 occurred in major population centers. Of those, 4 were swiftly contained. The other, in Winter's Court, led to shinobi and rioters clashing. There were several fatalities. The machine hissed and spluttered. Steam rose up from it, and the picture abruptly changed. It now showed a cartoon picture featuring a caricature of the third Hokage. Sarutobi was portrayed as a hunchbacked, scarred and balding man, with thick eyebrows, sharp teeth and covered in warts and liver spots. Above the picture read, Sarutobi, the Kingslayer, and below read, Poison in the Fire Lord's Ear. Several of the shinobi hissed at the sight of the treasonous material, but Sarutobi seemed unconcerned. This seems to be the main point of contention, my obvious disfigurements aside, Sarutobi said a touch wryly. 7 years ago, the 14th Fire Lord suffered a sudden heart attack and died. He was subsequently replaced by his son. These groups allege that Konoha is directly responsible for the 14th's death. He paused as the shinobi in the amphitheater listened in silence. It is, of course, utter nonsense. Sarutobi rebuked the notion firmly. This is not the land of wind, nor is it the land of water. Our village and the feudal court are intricately linked in 1,000 different ways. Our bond of friendship and loyalty to the feudal court is unsurpassed in all the lands we serve, and in turn, we are respected and valued. The picture changed again with another hiss and splutter. It was now a charcoal drawing, featuring a shinobi clad in robes and hidden behind a mask. On an unrelated mission to Winter's Court, Uzumaki Naruto made contact and engaged in combat with squad of foreign operatives, Sarutobi continued. The blonde Anbu in question ignored the murmurs as he stood behind his Hokage, even as many of the Jonin looked at him speculatively. Make no mistake. What we are seeing in the Land of Fire today is the direct consequence of an enemy false flag operation. Our land is under siege. The picture flickered again. Now it showed the face of a young man. Brown hair, brown eyes and a cheerful smile accompanied the picture, and the man seemed to be wearing the robes of a noble. The crimson soul draped around his neck signified that he was a member of the feudal court. Unfortunately, there are those who are walking right into the enemy's trap. Sarutobi pointed at the picture. This is Minamoto Hideo. He's a member of the 24 Torches, the assembly of nobles that govern the regions and sub-regions of the Land of Fire. He's young, charismatic, and utterly convinced that the Fire Lord is under Konoha's control. The 24 Torches controls many of the logistical, financial and local military operations in the Land of Fire. Sarutobi paused. Including Hideo, there are 7 members who are demanding an immediate review of the situation, including strict controls on shinobi placement, funding allocation and border protection. That got everybody talking, and the Jonin burst into whispers with each other. As professional as the Hokage's voice had been, even he could not hide the disdain at the very thought of it. The Land of Fire was the most prosperous nation in the elemental countries. It possessed great wealth and needed great power in order to defend that wealth from the envious. Any proposal to weaken the power of Konoha would weaken the country as a whole. Which was probably the entire justification behind the false flag operations. Naruto saw more than a few Jonin who had reached the same conclusion, and they looked somber. Given the chaotic events that had happened in the past year, was it possible that this was the prelude to war? After all, Konoha was at its weakest point in 10 years. Your standing orders, the third Hokage began. He paused, and waited for the chatter to die down. Your standing orders are as follows: carefully observe and record down all instances of civil disobedience and unrest. Any attempt by the civilian populace to impede your mission is to be met with firm, but non-lethal force. Patrol squads and military police had full power to arrest and detain people on suspicion of subversive activities. However, you do not have the authority to detain any member of the 24 Torches. Seek permission from your superiors before you do anything rash, and use your common sense. His eyes raked over the silent auditorium. Be prepared, and be careful, Sarutobi rumbled severely. Make no mistake. We are at the verge of something horrible. One false step and the Land of Fire could make what is happening in the Land of Water look like a slapping war between children. We do not want to go down that path. Dismissed. The Jonin rose up from their seats, talking and mumbling to each other as they began to leave the amphitheater. The mood was sour, and many of the experienced shinobi looked grim. Naruto eyed them from his spot behind the Hokage, the latter who had just struck up a conversation with Shikaku. He wasn't a medic nin or a Yamanaka, but even he could tell that the morale in the room wasn't great. Movement flickered in the corner of his eyes. He sharply turned his head, but relaxed as he saw Kakashi striding up to the podium looking completely unbothered. The other 2 members of Sigma Squad hidden in the shadows knew enough about the man to let him pass without hindrance. Kakashi saw that Naruto was watching him and smiled beneath his mask, waving a hand. Yo, Naruto, drawled the lanky Jonin. What ya doing? You know, my job, Naruto replied in a deadpan. He frowned. Technically, you shouldn't be back here. He gestured at the Anbu agents around him. You're making me look bad. Aha, Kakashi looked a tad sheepish. He scratched the back of his head. Well, far be it for me to make you look bad in front of your little friends. That's my team, Naruto countered. He rolled his eyes. Jerk. Kakashi laughed. Well, I'd call you a baby, or a brat, but you're not anymore, are you? He leaned down and socked Naruto gently in the shoulder. Happy 13th birthday. Naruto paused, his face scrunching up in thought. Are you sure? He asked a few moments later. He counted on his fingers, muttering under his breath. 5th, 6th, training on the 7th, we left on the 9th, and holy shit, it's my birthday. Like I said, Kakashi answered cheerfully, standing back. He smiled beneath his mask, his visible eye crinkling up. Happy birthday. Feel free to come to me for any puberty-related advice. He leant down conspiratively. I'll give you a hint. Yes, you are meant to be growing hair there. It's natural. Naruto's eye twitched. Learned that from your book, did you? He asked tightly. Goodness no, Kakashi laughed, waving it off. He waggled a finger in Naruto's face. A beautiful redhead taught me everything I know. He cocked his head. My Jonin sensei was meant to, but he chickened out for some reason. I wonder why, Naruto retorted dryly. Then, he scoffed and let out a chuckle. You know, I bet you would have made a hilarious preteen. Kakashi nodded sagely. I was pretty awesome, he admitted. Learn that from a beautiful redhead. Asked Naruto, eyebrow raised. Something flickered on Kakashi's face, and his hand came up to stroke the headband covering his eye. His face became pensive, and the smile that crossed his face under his mask didn't seem fake. Nah, he answered quietly. Somebody else taught me that. The lanky Jonin shook his head. Anyway, he said cheerfully. I've got stuff to do and 2 genin to torment. Have fun on your birthday, Naruto. Yeah. Later, Naruto called out absently. The Hokage had finished his conversation and was beckoning him over. You and your team are dismissed, the old man commanded. He sighed, puffing on the pipe in his mouth. You have the next 2 days off. Make sure you're mission ready by 0900 on the 3rd day. Understand? Yes, Hokage-sama, Naruto answered dutifully. The Hokage nodded and walked off, still talking quietly with Nara Shikaku. Naruto let out a sigh and gestured for Simga's squad to present themselves. There was a flash of movement and suddenly there were 2 people standing in front of him, Kage and Daichi. We'll meet up at Training Ground 74 tomorrow morning at 0800, the young blonde Anbu told them. Dismissed. The 3 Anbu nodded and disappeared in swirls of leaves. Naruto sighed and jumped off the podium. He reached into his flak jacket and pulled out a bottle of water. As he walked out of the auditorium, drinking from the bottle, he heard snippets of conversation from the milling Jonin. Most of it was quiet, speculative chatter, but as he walked he heard a snippet that made him pause. He probably did it, one Jonin was saying to the other. The stripes on his cheeks indicated that he was a Inuzuka. He didn't exactly deny it, did he? The other, a thin, lanky brown-haired man, nodded in agreement. The old man can be pretty ruthless when he needs to be. If it turns out that he did do it, well, it wouldn't surprise me. The other Jonin scoffed. Man, the old man needs to kick the bucket already and put somebody new at the top. I won't want our village to be dragged down by a... Whatever the man was going to say stopped in his throat as the other Jonin jabbed him in the ribs and gestured towards Naruto. Naruto was barely aware of the water seeping onto his clothes and dribbling down his arm, his fist clenched tightly around the bottle, his blue eyes hard and his face like thunder. Ah, shit, it's the old man's dog, the first Jonin said, not too subtlety. He folded his arms, looking down at Naruto. What do you want, Uzumaki? Go bug somebody else. I can't be bothered dealing Sarutobi's pup at the moment. Naruto carefully put his drink bottle away, his heartbeat increasing even as the other Jonin around them took notice. He took a step forward, his mouth opening, when suddenly there was a hand on his shoulder and he was abruptly whirled around. Captain, you need to come with me, Yuka said urgently. Her mask was on her face, her blonde locks trailing behind her back. It's emergency team business. Komaki and Toa, she trailed off. Naruto groaned. Given the penchant of those 2 to express the affection for one another in the form of explosive tags and sharp, shiny, metal objects, he didn't even want to know mess the 2 of them had gotten themselves into. If it needed the presence of their superior officer, it was probably going to be bad. Let's go, he told her, only pausing to look over his shoulder at the 2 Jonin. You 2 need to watch your mouths. Any more talk like that and there'll be an interrogator that would love to meet you. Yuka none too gently yanked him towards Komaki and Toa's apartment. They 2 Anbu operatives lived in the row of apartment buildings over in Sector 7, so it was a quick journey over the rooftops until they had made it. They entered the building, and Yuka practically dragged him up to Komaki's solid steel door. She pounded on it and it creaked open. Light spilled out from the crack and Yuka drew back. She nodded at Naruto, and he took a deep breath before he pushed open the door, fully expecting the worst. Happy birthday, came a chorus of voices. Somebody pulled a cord and a sign flapped down from the wall. Happy 13th birthday, it read, and moments later there was a small puff of smoke and a tiny hail of multicolored confetti rained down all over the room. Komaki, Toa, Kage, Sasuke and Daichi stood in the middle of Komaki's apartment. They were all wearing brightly colored party hats, even if Kage and Sasuke had faces of stone. Toa was holding a bottle, and he raised in Naruto's direction, while Komaki smiled at him. Daichi gave a cheery wave, and suddenly a set of arms threw themselves around his neck and Yuka's blonde hair tickled his face. Happy birthday, my cute, little captain. She squealed. She tugged at his cheeks. Ooh, look who's growing up to be a big boy. You're a big captain now, aren't you? Yes you are. Yes you are. What the? Stop that, get off, gar. Naruto batted the crazy woman away, and spluttered as he got a mouthful of her hair in his face. The excitable Yamanaka pushed him towards the rest, and Toa was there to meet him with a grave expression. Real men, he said, drink this. He handed Naruto a bottle, and the young blonde took it gingerly. He sniffed at it, and recoiled, even as Yuka pushed Sasuke towards him. Kage lurked in the background, a quiet but steady presence, while Daichi came up, laughing sheepishly and trying to apologize for Yuka. Naruto took it all in and smiled. Hey, Toa. Toa looked up. His arm was bare, the seals tattooed into his flesh glowing ominously, and he held a glowing crossbow in his hands, held together by black squiggly lines that extended from his arm into his palm and bright, scarlet light. Uchiha Sasuke stood on the other side of the clearing, his brow damp with perspiration. Yeah, Captain. The Anbu agent called back. Unlike his younger counterpart, he seemed completely at ease. Surveying them both was Naruto and the rest of his squad, resting on the lower branches of one of the many gigantic trees nestled deep in the center of Training Ground 74. The young blonde looked rather carefree as he sat on the branch, his legs swaying to and fro underneath him. Next to him sat Yamanaka Yuka, the cheery blonde girl lying down and using his leg as a pillow as she reading from a book. Kage was sitting in the branch opposite him, carefully polishing his favorite dull black machete, and Komaki and Daichi were 2 branches above them, engaged in a game of cards. Sasuke's a big boy now, Naruto answered. He scratched his head, grinning cheekily, and he gave the older Anbu agent a wink. Why don't you try the hard stuff? Toa faked a look of surprise. The hard stuff. He looked over at Sasuke, who had narrowed his eyes as he watched them converse. I dunno, sir. He doesn't look ready for the hard stuff. You sure? Naruto sounded doubtful. Hey, Sasuke. He called. You ready for the hard stuff? The Uchiha glanced up at him wearily, well used to the bright and cheery attitude Naruto took when the young captain was about to put him through hell. He shrugged his shoulders silently, his Sharingan slowly spinning in his eyes. See, he's ready, Naruto declared confidently. He waved off Toa's concerns with a dismissive brush of his hand. Totally try the hard stuff. If he can't handle it, I'll handle all the paperwork. Yeah, right, Toa snorted. He folded his arms. You said that about Beetle, and in the end I had to explain to HQ why our new Anbu recruit dropped out. Who's Beetle? Sasuke interjected, looking surprised. Oh, Beetle. He was our last recruit, Naruto lied with a brilliant smile. He paused, adopting a look of thought, and brought his finger up to his lip contemplatively. He also said that he could handle the hard stuff. He couldn't, Kage muttered quietly, although it was audible enough for the rest of the team to hear. Limbs weren't meant to bend that way. Some parts went this way, some parts went that way, Yuka giggled, then made a whoosh noise and threw out her hands. He totally couldn't handle the hard stuff, boss, and he looked a lot tougher than Sasuke. Sasuke's right eye was twitching. Stop it, Naruto ordered sternly, and he rapped Yuka lightly on the head with the back of his hand. He gave Sasuke an encouraging smile. Don't worry. Just because you had soft, silky hair, and delicate, pale skin, and pretty boy hands. And where's a peacock mask? Daichi called up from above. And where's a peacock mask? Naruto agreed. Just because you don't look tough doesn't mean that you aren't. I'm sure you can take it. He paused. Maybe. Sasuke was reining in his temper well, but his displeasure flashed through his eyes. Nonetheless, when he turned back to Toa, his shoulders were raised and his jaw locked out of sheer stubbornness and pride. Toa nodded approvingly, and then raised his arm. With a metallic hiss, the seals on his arm shot out into his palm, and from it formed a crossbow of scarlet light. The Anbu agent raised it and nodded as Sasuke. Ready. Toa called. Sasuke gripped 2 kunai in the palm of his hand and nodded. Then, Toa raised the crossbow and fired. A shot of searing, bright scarlet light shot from the end of the crossbow with a loud sizzle. It made the previous shots look like mosquito bites in comparison. Almost immediately, Sasuke hurled both kunai at the ground in front of him and flipped through 3 hand signs. Then, he brandished his palm at the approaching bolt of scarlet light, revealing a seal that had appeared on his hand. Barrier technique, 2-prong seal. Little tags wrapped around the handles of the two kunai lodged in the ground before him flashed with a blue light, and Toa's attack surged forward and struck a barrier of glowing blue light. It hissed and fizzled, the ground blackening around the kunai as the grass smoldered. The barrier wobbled, but held, and Toa lowered his arm, looking impressed. Not bad, kid, he chuckled. Sasuke looked pleased as he lowered his hand. He glanced at the fading seal on his hand with a speculative look, and then clenched his fist with a vicious grin. Barriers, huh? Yuka asked quietly. The back of her head was warm against his shoulder, but Naruto didn't mind one bit. He nodded. It's a good skill to have, Naruto murmured to her. He was looking down at Sasuke speculatively, rubbing his chin. Actually, I might even have a bit of a practice when I get some time. There are a few good ones that might come in handy. I'd love to learn some of the space-time barriers, but a lot of them require some tricky fuinjutsu, and I completely suck at that. You're not good at something. No way. Yuka mock gasped, lowering her book and craning her neck upwards to grin at him. Oh, I suck at fuinjutsu, Naruto admitted. He shook his head, smiling wryly. It takes a lot of effort to stuff up storage seals to the point where they explode like a Class 2 explosive tag, but I did it anyway. Yuka chuckled, and Naruto smiled. Then, he stilled and glanced up at the sky. A carrier pigeon was descending towards him, carrying a message strapped to its leg. It landed on the branch, and Naruto gingerly took the bird's leg and untied the message. He read it. Wrap it up, guys, he called out. Yuka straightened up, and Naruto felt a pang at the loss of the warmth. He shook it off as he climbed to his feet. We've got a mission. Naruto had a sinking sensation that it wasn't going to be a standard mission when his orders had instructed for his team to assemble in the Hokage's office instead of one of the standard briefing rooms. All of Sigma team stood in a semicircle around the Hokage's desk, masked, robed, and ready for combat. Naruto stood in the center, his arms folded, while the Hokage sat behind his desk surveying a series of documents. This is a report from the Department of Intelligence, the Hokage spoke up. His voice was hoarse, and he gave a couple of coughs to clear his throat. The analysis of the explosive tags used during the suicide attack during the Chunin exams has been completed. The Hokage passed it to Naruto, who took it and read over it carefully. The young Anbu captain nodded sagely to himself, and then gave a startled cry as a book slammed into his mask, sending him staggering back, although he was able to keep on his feet. Liar, the Hokage scoffed, retracting his extended arm. He passed on a second document to Kage, who took it with a respectful nod. Grumbling, Naruto fell back into formation as the Hokage continued speaking. The samples have indicated that the explosive tags used in the attack were not manufactorium stock, the Hokage reported. He took a deep breath and smoothed over the red and white conical hat on top of his head. Normally this would indicate that they were homemade, possibly by an enemy shinobi, but the analysts are quite confident that the explosive tags were made in bulk, possibly from a sheet of at least a dozen. A ripple of surprise ran through the circle of listening Anbu. The manufacture of explosive tags was well known throughout the elemental countries, and any individual shinobi could, with patience, craft their own. It was a time-demanding process that took far more effort than expected. A skilled shinobi that could, in a day, craft 4 or 5 explosive tags, was doing well. The process of manufacturing explosive tags in bulk through the use of printing presses, however, was far trickier. The great villages had experimented with the process for decades, but it seemed like there was simply no cost-effective way to do it. Only one institution had ever managed to decipher the process, and they guarded the closely guarded with a legion of samurai warriors and intense security measures. The manufactorium. Explosive tags were one of most effective tools in the arsenal of a shinobi, and Konoha spent vast amounts of money importing them in from the manufactorium. To think that another organization had deciphered the secret was alarming, especially considering that whoever it was had been quite willing to sell them to enemies of the village. Naruto clenched his fists. Do we know who, Hokage-sama? He asked quietly. The Hokage shook his head as he placed the folder back on his table. He picked up a loose piece of paper and passed it over to Kage. We have a single lead. His name is Akiyama Minoru. Kage passed around a set of photos to the team. Naruto took it, and looked at the picture of the brown-haired man. He looked rather cheerful, and he was giving a happy wave. He immediately spotted calluses on Minoru's hands, and the tanned, rough skin of his arms. Minoru is a small landowner of a winery 140 kilometers south from Border City. A year ago, he presented a sample of his best wine and was awarded minor noble status. Before that, however, Minoru was an engineer working for Gato Corporation and an amateur inventor. The Hokage rubbed his chin, fingers plucking at his goatee. Minoru made an appointment with the fire court a little over 3 months regarding one of his inventions. However, the night before his appearance, Minoru apparently made a faux pas in front of the fire lady and immediately left the capital in disgrace. The Hokage gestured at one last piece of paper. A week ago, our agents in the capital sent over a bundle of documents sorted by key words. One of them was a patent request by Minoru. It suggests that he may be in possession of a machine that can create explosive tags in bulk. The Hokage gave Naruto a steady look. Your mission is as follows: you are to infiltrate Minoru's winery, search for evidence of any such machine. If you find it, you are to immediately confiscate it and bring it to Konoha, along with Minoru himself. Understood? Yes, Hokage-sama, Team Sigma chorused as one. Good. Sarutobi gave a short nod. Dismissed. Border Town was the largest city in the western region of the Land of Fire, situated on the border between the Land of Fire and the Land of Rain. The large city still bore many of the walls and fortifications from the Second Great Shinobi War. The perpetual monsoon seasons of the Land of Rain bled off into the area, making it a very fertile region, and it had one of the biggest agricultural outputs of the elemental countries. Farms stretched hundreds of kilometers south of the city towards the border of river country, rows upon rows of crops carefully maintained by the civilian populace. Cattle grazed on open grasslands, and vineyards stretched over the hilly crops. Team Sigma stayed off the main, cobbled road and stuck to the fields, darting through fields of corn of wheat, skimming over paddies of rice, and dodging rather startled livestock. They had left Konoha in the early afternoon and they had made good time at a rather brisk pace. The sun was only beginning to set as Team Sigma approached Minoru's farm and fanned out amongst the vineyard, hiding behind the rows of wooden stakes and purple grapes. Fan out, search pattern, avoid detection, remain in 2-pair visual, Naruto signed with his hands. Without a sound, and staying in the shadow of the vineyard, the Anbu squad stealthily approached the modest 2-story cottage ahead. Smoke billowed from the chimney, and the upstairs lights were on, but it didn't seem like anybody was outside. It was clear that while the family had been granted the title, they did not have the status of lifestyle typical of the nobility. There was a large shed behind the cottage, made from dull brown brick and seemingly heavily reinforced. The grass and plants around it had withered and died, and piles of broken glass, spooled wire and scrap metal surrounded it. The doors themselves were made of thick metal. Naruto gestured at Daichi, and pointed at the shed. The Hyuga nodded and peered forward, his Byakugan obviously activating from underneath his mask. A moment later, he shook his head. Advance, Yuka and I will take point, cover, Naruto signed. The Anbu team glided forward, avoiding the clearing around the cottage and approaching the shed from behind. The sun was dipping behind the hills now, and the stars were beginning to twinkle as darkness settled upon the land. Yuka took to Naruto's right and the 2 Anbu agents approached the shed. He inspected the lock, and then motioned Daichi forward. The Hyuga crept forward, his cloak blending in with the encroaching darkness, and his eyes surveyed the lock. Very carefully, he raised his fingers and tapped at several parts of the lock. There was a tiny click, and something snapped with a soft hiss, and then Daichi nodded. All clear, the Hyuga signed. Naruto nodded back and together he and Yuka opened the door a crack and slipped inside the shed. The first thing that he noticed was the smell. A dozen different scents assaulted his nose at an instance. Oil, grease, rust, cleaners all immediately stood out. Beneath them, though, was the smell of explosive smoke, burnt ozone and black powder. His eyes scanned up and down the shed. Workbenches had been placed against the wall, each stacked with piles of metal and tools Naruto didn't even know the name of. Boxes of spooled wire had been dumped in the middle of the floor, and large sheets of thick, white ceramic lay against one of the walls. A furnace blazed in one corner, the coals glowing hot red. There was no sign of any machine, although Naruto didn't know how big it was supposed to be. He turned to Yuka, who held her hands in a hand seal as she concentrated. She was the best sensor that the team had, although not as good as the hunter squad. The blonde-haired girl was concentrating, and she held the hand seal for a full minute. Naruto stalked around the shed as she did so, carefully surveying each item. Then, Yuka broke out of her stance and reached into her cloak. She pulled out a small metal kit, which she opened and took out a series of paper strips. She handed half of them to Naruto, and took the other half herself. Naruto took the strips and began to dab them on the various workbenches, scraping at the residue and then placing them in a small bag. He got all of the workbenches, many of the tools and even the inside of the furnace, although that one was done quite quickly. Between the two of them, they went through about 50 strips in less than 5 minutes. Yuka took the bag from him, and then made the hand seal again. Inky black writing appeared on the bag, crawling over the clear plastic like spiders. It gave off a yellow glow for a few moments, and then the seal formula abruptly disappeared. Yuka reached into her cloak again, pulled out a notebook and opened it up. Possible match found. Residue here greatly resembles sample 80% accuracy, she signed. Naruto considered that as the two of them made their way out of the shed. Apprehend suspect, restrain everybody. The unsuspecting family didn't know what was happening until it was too late. One moment, the family of 5, one man, one woman who was obviously his wife, 2 sons under the age of 10 and a baby daughter were sitting down to eat. The next moment the dinner table was surrounded by 7 black-cloaked, white-masked Anbu. The animal masks leered down at the terrified family, which froze for a split second, and that was the time the shinobi needed. Wire and gags were placed in each of the civilians' mouths. The woman was shrieking in terror, restrained by an even-handed Daichi, while the 2 children were white with fear. The youngest, no older than 6, began to sob as Sasuke wrapped wire his arm and leg firm enough to keep him still. In less than 10 seconds, each member of the family apart from the baby was restrained. Minoru's eyes were bulging as he tried to say something behind his gag. Team Sigma remained silent as Naruto strode to the head of the table, his arms folded. He stared down at the man, although it was less of an incline as he had hoped, as Minoru's height, even sitting down, as almost as tall as Naruto was. "We are Konoha's Anbu," Naruto introduced himself quietly. He swallowed down his emotions, ignoring the shaking children, and steadied himself. Chains rattled in his ears. Minoru looked even more terrified. He tried to say something else, his muffled voice indecipherable behind the gag. "In a moment, I will tell my teammate to remove your gag. You will not talk. You will not move. You will sit there and answer my questions. If you lie, or you refuse to answer, my friend will enter your mind and take the information by force. Do you understand?" Minoru was breathing very heavily, but he nodded frantically. Naruto gave him a few moments, internally grimacing at the heavy-handedness of it all. He didn't want to take the risk of a Yamanaka interrogation causing permanent mental damage, or worse, tripping a fail-safe within the man's mind. Civilians were much more susceptible to the negative side effects of such intrusive techniques, and this was their only lead. After a few minutes had passed, Minoru's breathing had calmed and Naruto nodded at Komaki. The woman leaned down and carefully removed the gag in Minoru's mouth. Almost immediately, the man sucked in a huge gulp of air. He looked up and opened his mouth to speak, only to see Naruto raise his hand almost instantly. "Don't talk," Naruto ordered. "Don't say a word. Only speak when you're asked a question." Minoru's mouth snapped shut and he nodded fearfully. He exchanged a quick look with his wife, who gazed back at him with panicked, teary eyes. Then he regarded his children, swallowed hard, and looked back at Naruto determinedly. 2 weeks ago, there was an attack during the Chunin exams, Naruto stated. A man came into the arena and detonated several explosive tags on his person. Do you know of the incident I'm talking about? Minoru nodded slowly, then licked his lips and replied in a hoarse voice. Yes. The explosive tags were produced in bulk from a machine not in the possession of the manufactorium, Naruto continued. Our intelligence led us to here. Our tests show that the residue from the explosive tags greatly resembles the residue in your workshop. Do you understand? Minoru swallowed. Yes, he answered weakly. Naruto smiled thinly behind his mask. Explain. That is, Minoru took a deep breath. I invented a printing press that can make explosive tags. I tried to present it to the fire court, but here he slightly reddened. I was removed from the capital before I could make the presentation. When I got home, somebody had left a message. They were interested in my device and were willing to sponsor me, but in return they needed to test the explosive tags and have them examined. Who? Naruto asked crisply. I don't know, Minoru replied, and then his face became desperate and Naruto rose from his seat. I don't. All I was told that it was an anonymous, interested member of the court. You didn't think that was suspicious? Naruto asked skeptically. I was desperate. Minoru shot back, his voice rising. He clenched his teeth. Ever since the Blitz, the vineyard has been doing poorly. Nobody wants wine in a time of war. I have debts too, here he hesitated, to some very unpleasant people. This benefactor paid good money for 100 explosive tags, and promised more if they were satisfactory. I was there when they detonated, Naruto replied a tad sharply. Trust me, they work just fine. Minoru flushed. Where's the machine? Naruto asked. Upstairs in my study, Minoru answered quietly. Please. I'll show it to you. You can take it. Just leave my family out of this. I'm not a traitor, or a terrorist, or an enemy. He said he was from of the royal court. Naruto nodded at Komaki and she removed the wire from Minoru. The noble gingerly rubbed his wrists as Naruto stood up. Take me to the machine. It was much smaller than Naruto had expected. Rather than fill up an entire room, or even half, it was compact enough to fit on a wooden desk. With a rectangular base, it was the size of a shoebox, composed gears and bolts and a large cylinder wrapped around a carved engraving. A crank handle jutted out from one side, and there was a battery jutted out from the other. Naruto looked at it carefully. It was a chakra battery, a terminal capable of a charge of chakra for about 3 months before dissipating. They were rather rare, as the batteries were only good for one use. How does it make explosive tags? Naruto asked. Minoru pointed to a roll of paper on the floor. Put in the paper in one end, turn the battery on, wind the handle, feed the paper through and voila, explosive tags. He smiled grimly. I can make a dozen explosive tags a day before the battery fails. Naruto nodded thoughtfully. The device looked rather fragile, so he asked, does it have a carry case? Minoru nodded and walked over to the cupboard. From it, he pulled out a large, stout metal case. He very carefully placed the device inside it and closed the lid with a click. He then handed it to Naruto. Now what? He asked quietly. You're going to have to come with me, Naruto admitted. Konoha will want to debrief you. Your family can come too. No doubt, you'll find that an excellent job is waiting for you in Konoha's Department of Research and Development. Probably highly paid, too. This is my family home, Minoru said, clenching his fists. I can't leave it. You will, Naruto rebuked coldly. This is not a request. You will come with us. Your knowledge is too valuable to leave it underfen. There was a shudder. The window pane rattled within the frame and Naruto paused. The stars and the moon were shining brightly, but there was a flicker of movement and suddenly something blotted out the light streaming in from the window. Naruto's eyes widened and he grabbed Minoru, yanking the man down. An instant later, the wall exploded as something pulverized it through sheer force. It tore through the wooden desk, missing Naruto and Minoru by mere centimeters as it rocketed through the house, destroying everything in its path. Wooden splinters and broken plaster drifted to the ground as Naruto staggered to his feet, his hands flipping through hand seals, his heart racing. He reared his head back and shot out a narrow stream of flame. It lanced through the air, striking another one of the objects and slicing it in two, briefly illuminating it as it did so. It was a giant, misshapen boulder, hurled towards the house with great force and power. The two pieces fell short of the house and slammed into the front yard with a thump. Downstairs, Naruto could hear the wails of a baby, and he swiveled around. Minoru was gone. Fuck. Naruto swore. He grabbed the carry case and used the strap to fit it to his back. Then he dashed through the broken remains of the room and kicked apart the broken wooden floorboards beneath him, making a hole large enough to squeeze downstairs from. He landed in a crouch, just in time to see Sasuke throw a series of kunai around the room. The Uchiha clasped his hands, and blue light surged from the tags on the hilts of the kunai. Barrier technique, 5-folded 2-prong seal. An instant later, a terribly powerful lightning technique blasted apart the kitchen. Naruto was blinded, his eyes stringing as a purple wave of destruction slammed into them all. The bluish barrier flickered and wobbled, but it held even as the lightning tore everything around them into tiny parts. The house groaned and creaked, and the top floor began to fall onto its side, luckily on the other end away from the kitchen. Incoming! Daichi yelled. There was a blur of movement, and Toa and Cage were ready to meet it. Steel clashed on steel as Cage parried a blow to the side, sparks flying through the air. From the flames around them, the assailant was quite clear. Cloaks as dark as their own, and wearing a solid, one-piece mask made from brushed chrome, the enemy was quite skilled with his long, thin rapier. Toa held back another enemy, his scarlet seals formed into the shape of a hefty shield, holding back a kunai that would have been driven into his chest. Wind release, great wind breakthrough. Naruto swept out his hands and a mighty gust tore through the air. Smoke, fire, debris and half the front of the house disappeared underneath the power of the windstorm, blown far away, although the shinobi in front of him kept their balance, anchored by the chakra running through the soles of their feet. It was enough to get a good picture of who they were facing. 4 enemy agents, each in a solid, one-piece mask of dull chrome, fought against Team Sigma. Cage, Komaki, Toa and Daichi had met them head-on, while Sasuke knelt on one knee, panting from exertion of the barrier technique he had just summoned. Beyond them, in the distance, Naruto could see 2 more enemy nin, obviously the long-range specialist on their team. In the next 5 seconds, a dozen things happened at once. Cage and his opponent met within a cacophony of metal striking metal, their movements a blur even as Cage was pushed back by a superior opponent. In turn, Daichi had landed a lucky hit, his identity as a Hyuga hidden by his mask, and the Juken strikes had caused an audible and clearly feminine hiss when the enemy chose to block instead of dodge. Toa was being driven into the ground, huddling behind his shield unable to even use the replacement technique to escape. The scarlet light flickered around him as his thin, lithe opponent danced around him, weapons flashing. Dual kunai sliced into the shield, the opponent used the momentum of block to jump and deliver a roundhouse kick with a blade built into the heel of their shoe. Then they hurled the kunai at Toa's head, clutched a fistful of senbon and chucked them at Toa's exposed shins, yanked back on the wires hidden in their sleeves and pulled the 2 kunai back into their palm just as they landed on a ground in a crouch, ready to attack again. It was only Yuka's intervention that kept Toa alive as he collapsed, his legs riddled with senbon, and the wiry genjutsu user made a single hand seal and produced an auditory illusion, a single, high-pierced whine that blasted in the ears of the dual kunai wielder, disrupting the incessant barrage against Toa's defense and allowing him to jump back. Komaki had taken to the shattered remains of the roof and she and her opponent were dancing amongst the twisted beams of the roof. Her opponent held an orb of light in their hand, and with every strike and blow, a crackle of lightning would strike out at something. This was forcing Komaki to dodge every strike rather than dodge or parry, and she struggled to keep her distance as she peppered her opponent with senbon. In that time, the 2 long-ranged fighters had finished making their seals, just as Naruto had finished his own, slamming his hand on the ground. Summoning technique, Arise, Titan. The ground between the fight and the long-distance fight shuddered, cracking and breaking apart. A large hand of rock, covered in tar and with veins of molten rock, burst from the ground. It was 4 times as large as a man, and its fingers flexed menacingly. Another giant hand burst out of the ground 10 meters away. The hands pressed on the ground and it gave way, deep impressions being left in the earth as it moved in a manner of somebody pulling themselves up from the ground. Then, the ground between the 2 arms was torn apart in a geyser of flying rock and a giant head of stone emerged from beneath. It was a distorted mimicry of the human skull, its eye sockets filled with molten rock and its sharpened teeth curved into a twisted vestige of a smile. Steam rose into the air, and the surroundings became very hot. It rose just in time to block a series of devastating lightning release techniques. Bolts of sapphire and azure power slammed into the Titan, tearing through its rocky hide. One of the searing beams sliced into the left arm of the Titan, severing it and leaving a stump oozing and bubbling with molten rock. Another punctured the top part of the skull, blowing a chunk the size of Naruto away. The barrage ended a few moments later, the Titan having successfully blocked the attacks. The Titan's head turned a full 180 degrees. Its caved-in skull leered at the 4 enemies trapped between it and Team Sigma. Naruto continued to control the construct, his hands darting through the hand seals rapidly as its one good hand rose up as if to strike at the nearest enemy. An instant later, thunder cracked through the air and the arm was reduced to 1,000 tiny flying pieces of debris as something struck it from behind. Another technique struck the head, tearing through the rock with ease, but the molten rock dribbling from it merely darkened and became hard, keeping the construct intact. Fire release, Titan's roar. At the same time as Naruto completed the technique, he sent a single, large pulse through the Anbu tattoo on his shoulder. At once, Team Sigma retreated towards him, Toa limping as he did so. The Titan's mouth glowed with an ominous red, and then from it came a billowing cloud of fire that swept across the ground, consuming everything in its path. The enemy shinobi jumped away from it, and two of them began to pepper it with kunai and explosive tags, while the other two tried to flank on the other side of Team Sigma. "We're retreating," Naruto growled between gritted teeth, his hand twisted into the serpent seal. Daichi, survivors. Family deceased. Suspect 30 meters behind us, underneath a beam, severe injuries, survival unlikely, Daichi signed. Fall back, Naruto ordered. Komaki, light up the workshop. Kage, take Toa. Daichi, take Sasuke. Yuka, provide a smokescreen. Go. In a flash of movement, Team Sigma moved. Even burdened with the extra weight, Kage and Daichi didn't seem to slow down as they grabbed their teammates and sprinted away from the burning cottage in an instant. Huge clouds of billowing smoke exploded around them, and there was a loud shudder and boom as the workshop went up in flames. The retreat took 5 seconds. The fight had barely lasted 30. Naruto was the last to leave, the portable machine strapped to his back. He dropped his hands and let the chakra-consuming technique dissipate even as the acrid smell of smoke filled his nostrils. He darted past the wreckage, only pausing at the partially crushed body of Minoru. The man stared up at him with pained eyes, and Naruto ruthlessly forced down any emotion he felt as he knelt by the body and, with a quick flick of the wrist, calmly slit his throat. He slapped an explosive tag to the man's forehead and then darted away. A second later, a deafening explosion rocked the ground and little bits of flying debris slapped against his back. Naruto ignored it, laying down another series of explosive tags as he ran just as more smoke bombs went off, securing his team's retreat. A gnawing sensation filled his gut as the vineyards around them began to burn, and huge plumes of smoke filled the air. Despite the strategic value of the package on his back, Naruto didn't like to retreat, but he knew when to cut his losses. Team Sigma had been routed, but they had secured the package and completed their mission. A few hours later, Team Sigma arrived back in Konoha. They were covered in soot and dust, and they smelled like smoke and fire. Apart from a quick 5-minute break, they had not stopped until they had reached the village, and each member was exhausted and tired. Nonetheless, they trudged after the Anbu squad sent to escort them to the Hokage's office. Inside, the Hokage watched them from behind his desk. The lights had been dimmed, and the glow of his pipe was noticeable in the darkened room. Report. As his squad mates stood around him, Naruto obeyed, explaining their investigation, his interrogation of Minoru, the revelation of the portable printing press and the attack from the unknown enemy squad. He hesitated at his decision to retreat. "I felt that the machine we had obtained was too valuable to risk it in a fight," Naruto justified to the Hokage. His back was stiff and there was a bitter taste in his mouth as he spoke. "And, to be honest, the enemy had us on the ropes. They were extremely skilled." He smiled thinly. "They might have been better than us, Hokage-sama. Even though a live prisoner would have been useful, I don't know if we could have won that fight." The Hokage nodded somberly. "You made the right choice, Captain," he said quietly. "You made the completion of the mission and the survival of your squad a priority, and here you have returned with both intact. Well done." Naruto took the compliment with a nod. The Hokage eyed the rest of Team Sigma. "Dismissed," he said quietly. "Report to medical. I want after-action reports from all of you by tomorrow morning." Hokage-sama. Team Sigma chorused. Sasuke was the last to leave, his eyes lingering on Naruto, and then he disappeared in a whirl of leaves. Sarutobi clicked his fingers and Naruto wasn't surprised to see 2 Anbu captains appeared before him. Bird and Cat, the latter's long, purple hair visible from behind her mask, crouched before their leader. "Take your platoons and scour the area," the old man ordered curtly. "Find the shinobi who attacked Sigma team. Apprehend them if you can, kill them if you must. Go." "Sir." They both saluted and disappeared in a flicker of movement. Once they were gone, the Hokage sagged into his chair. He played with the pipe in his mouth, puffing away at the tobacco inside of it as he turned to gaze out at the starry night sky. "You have done well, Naruto," he murmured. "I would have liked to take Minoru alive, but the acquisition of this machine is a tremendous boon to the village. If we can backwards engineer it, we can begin the construction of our own explosive tags. We can save millions." "Yes, sir." Naruto was tired, falling back on formalities. This machine, however, Sarutobi puffed on his pipe and swiveled on his chair. Are you sure that the workshop was completely destroyed? Naruto nodded. They won't have enough time to dig through too much of the rubble, he answered tiredly. They'll have to know reinforcements will head their way, so they'll be gone by the time Bravo and Gamma team get there. Sarutobi's lips twitched. Do you think they'll be caught? He asked. Naruto smiled grimly. No, he answered. I concur, the Hokage admitted. He shook his head tiredly and rubbed his eyes. What a powerful machine, he mused. It completely changes the face of national security. Any man, without chakra, could sit at home, make an explosive tag and use it wherever they want. The implications are staggering. Naruto was silent. And we have no lead on whoever it was that ordered the tags, Sarutobi continued. He puffed on his pipe, and then finally seemed to notice that Naruto was dead on his feet. Go home, Naruto. Rest. He turned back on his chair to look out at the night sky. I have the strangest sensation that you're going to need your full strength in the coming events. Naruto nodded and turned to leave. Oh, and Naruto, Sarutobi called out. Naruto turned back and the Hokage gave him a genuine smile. Well done on your Titan technique, the old man praised. I hadn't realized that you were onto the third stage already. It needs work. Those lightning techniques tore it to pieces and I couldn't reform it, Naruto admitted. Plus, it was tiny, not something you'd fight a class 5 summon with. With time, Naruto. Sarutobi chuckled. Now go home and shower. You smell. Naruto left them, leaving the third Hokage sitting alone in the dimly lit room, staring thoughtfully off into the distance. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.